The day I returned a stranger's wallet was the day I accidentally stepped into a world I was never supposed to see. I still remember the sound of the train doors closing behind me, the cold November air rushing through the station, and the strange feeling that something small was about to change everything. At the time, I thought it was just another ordinary Tuesday in New York City. I was Olivia Reed, 27 years old, a community library assistant who spent most of her days surrounded by books, quiet conversations, and people who rarely noticed the person behind the front desk. My life was simple. My apartment in Queens was small but comfortable. My coffee came from the same corner shop every morning, and my biggest problem was usually deciding whether I had enough energy to cook dinner after a long shift. I never expected a single moment on a crowded subway platform to rewrite my entire future. The wallet was lying near a bench beneath the flickering station lights. At first, I walked past it. New Yorkers are trained not to interfere with everything they see. Everyone has somewhere to be. Everyone is carrying something invisible. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the way the leather looked worn, like it had been carried for years. Maybe it was the small photograph sticking out from the side. I picked it up carefully and looked around. No one was searching for it. No one was calling out. I opened it just enough to find a name. Vincent Romano. There were no credit cards, no cash, nothing that explained who he was. Just a few old receipts, a handwritten note, and that photograph. The picture caught my attention. It showed a young boy standing beside an older man near what looked like a family home. The boy's expression was serious, almost like he had learned too early that life was not always easy. I don't know why, but I felt something when I looked at it. A sadness. A memory that didn't belong to me. I brought the wallet home, planning to return it the next morning. I searched online, hoping to find a normal way to contact him. Instead, the results made me pause. Vincent Romano wasn't just a businessman. His name appeared in articles about real estate, luxury hotels, and private companies across the city. People described him as powerful, mysterious, and impossible to understand. Some called him a man who controlled an empire. Others said he was someone who never appeared unless something important was happening. I almost laughed at myself. I was sitting in my tiny apartment wearing old sweatpants, holding a wallet that belonged to a man who lived in a completely different universe. I should have mailed it. I should have handed it to the police. I should have forgotten about it. But the next morning, I followed the address I found and returned it to the building listed as his office. I expected a receptionist, maybe a security guard, maybe a simple thank you. I didn't expect the entire room to become quiet when I walked inside. I didn't expect people to look at me like they were trying to understand why someone like me was standing there. And I definitely didn't expect the man who came through those glass doors to stop the moment he saw the wallet in my hand. Vincent Romano was not what I imagined. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to prove his importance. He simply walked into the room, and somehow everyone noticed. His dark suit was perfectly fitted, his expression calm, his eyes carrying the kind of focus that made me feel like he could see every detail I was trying to hide. He looked at the wallet. Then he looked at me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked, "Where did you find this?" His voice was quiet, but there was something behind it. Something that told me this wallet was not just an object. It was connected to something he had spent years protecting. I smiled nervously and handed it to him. "On the subway. I thought you'd want it back." He took it slowly, almost carefully, like it carried memories instead of money. Then his eyes returned to mine. "You have no idea what you just returned to me." That was the moment I realized the wallet was never the important part. The important part was the person who found it. And somehow, without knowing it, I had just walked into Vincent Romano's world. A world where kindness had consequences, secrets had history, and one small choice could change two lives forever. The first thing I noticed about Vincent Romano was not his reputation. It was the way everyone around him became careful with their words. The morning after I returned his wallet, I kept telling myself I had done something simple. I had found something that belonged to someone else, and I gave it back. That was all. At least, that was what I wanted to believe. But when I stepped outside his office building, I could still feel the weight of his final words. "You have no idea what you just returned to me." I carried that sentence with me all day. It followed me through the subway ride home, through my evening shift at the library, and even while I stood in my kitchen making a cup of tea I barely drank. I was not someone who searched for mysteries. I liked answers. I liked routines. I liked knowing exactly what tomorrow would look like. But Vincent Romano had turned one ordinary morning into a question I could not ignore. The next afternoon, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Hello. I answered cautiously. Miss Reed, a calm voice asked. This is Daniel from Mr. Romano's office. I froze for a moment. Is everything okay? Mr. Romano would like to thank you properly for returning his property. I looked around my small apartment, at the stack of library books on my table and the laundry waiting in the corner. That is not necessary. I was just doing the right thing. There was a brief silence on the other end. Mr. Romano expected you to say that. I did not know why that surprised me, but it did. The idea that someone like Vincent Romano had noticed my reaction felt strange. People like him probably had hundreds of conversations every day. Why would he remember mine? The answer came later that evening when I arrived home and found a small envelope waiting outside my apartment door. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for returning something that belonged to my family. Most people see value in what they can take. You reminded me that some people still value what they can give. Vincent Romano. I read the note several times. It was not what I expected. I expected arrogance. I expected someone powerful to act like the world existed for his convenience. Instead, I found a few simple sentences written by someone who sounded tired. Someone carrying memories he did not talk about. The following week, I saw him again. Not because I planned to. Not because I was looking for him. It happened at a small charity event hosted by the library. I had volunteered to help organize donated books for children across the city. I was arranging boxes near the entrance when I heard a familiar voice behind me. You always help strangers? I turned around and saw Vincent standing there. For a second, I forgot what I was doing. He looked different outside his office. Less like a businessman everyone feared, and more like a person trying to understand a world he rarely visited. Only when they need help, I replied. A small expression crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but something close. You say that like it is simple. Maybe it is. He looked at the boxes around us. Most people make kindness complicated. I did not know what to say. The man standing in front of me was surrounded by success, influence, and everything money could create. Yet somehow, he seemed like someone searching for something money could never provide. Then his eyes moved toward the old photograph I had seen inside his wallet. That picture, I said quietly. His expression changed. You remember it. I remember everything about that wallet. I do not know why, but I felt like it mattered. Vincent looked away for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. It was the last picture I had with someone important. I wanted to ask who. I wanted to understand why a simple wallet carried so much emotion. But something told me not to push. For the first time, I saw a different side of Vincent Romano. Not the powerful man people whispered about. Not the person hidden behind a carefully built image. Just a man holding on to a memory he was not ready to lose. And that was when I realized something I never expected. I had returned his wallet. But somehow, he had given me a glimpse into a part of himself that he never showed anyone. After that evening at the charity event, I thought about Vincent Romano more than I wanted to admit. Not because he was mysterious. Not because everyone seemed to know his name. It was because, for a few brief moments, I had seen something behind the image everyone else believed in. I had seen a person carrying a memory that still mattered to him. And somehow, that felt more important than all the stories people told about his success. A week passed before I saw him again. I returned to my normal routine. Morning coffee from the same small shop near my apartment. Long hours organizing books at the library. Quiet evenings spent reading on my worn-out couch. Life went back to being predictable, and I was grateful for that. But then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Miss Reed. The voice was familiar. Daniel, Vincent's assistant. Yes. I answered, already wondering why someone from his office was calling me again. Mr. Romano would like your help with something. I paused. My help? Yes. He believes you may be the only person who can answer a question. That sentence immediately made me uncomfortable. I was not someone with special connections. I was not someone who belonged in Vincent Romano's world. I was just Olivia Reed, a woman who found a wallet on a subway platform. I think there must be a misunderstanding, I said. I do not know anything important. Daniel was quiet for a moment. That is exactly why he wants to speak with you. The next evening, I met Vincent at a small private room inside a quiet restaurant in Manhattan. It was not the kind of place that felt intimidating. There were no dramatic entrances, no attention from strangers. Just soft lighting, quiet conversations, and a feeling that everything had been carefully chosen. Vincent stood when I arrived. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from him, still unsure why I was there. "You said I might have an answer." He placed a small envelope on the table. My eyes immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from the wallet. "I found this inside after you returned it," he explained. I had forgotten it was there. I looked at the envelope but did not touch it. "Why are you showing me?" Vincent studied my expression. "Because you were the last person outside my family to see the wallet before I opened it again." There was something in his voice that told me this was not about money or business. It was personal. He opened the envelope carefully and removed a small piece of paper. The writing was old and slightly faded. "This belonged to someone who helped my family many years ago," he said. "Someone who disappeared before I could properly thank them." I listened quietly. There was a sadness in his words that surprised me. Vincent Romano was the kind of person people imagined had everything: confidence, success, influence. But sitting across from him, I realized there were things even he could not replace. "Why do you think I can help?" I asked. He looked directly at me. "Because the day you returned my wallet, you mentioned something." I searched my memory. "What did I say?" "You said the photograph inside looked familiar." I felt my heartbeat change. I had almost forgotten that moment. I did not mean anything by it. It just felt like I had seen that house before. Vincent leaned back slightly, thinking. "Where?" I closed my eyes for a second, trying to remember. My grandmother had an old photo album. There was a picture of a house that looked similar. I thought it was just a coincidence. For the first time, I saw a genuine surprise in his expression. Not the controlled reaction of a businessman. A real human reaction. "Your grandmother's name?" he asked. I hesitated. "Margaret Reed." The room became quiet. Not uncomfortable, just still. Vincent looked down at the paper in his hand, then back at me. "Olivia, I need to ask you something." "What?" His voice lowered. "Has anyone in your family ever mentioned the Romano name?" I felt a strange feeling in my chest. A question I never expected to hear. A name I had never connected to my own life. "No," I answered honestly. "Why?" Vincent looked toward the window as rain moved across the glass. "Because I think your family and mine may have known each other a long time ago." I left that restaurant with more questions than answers. The world I thought I understood suddenly had hidden doors I had never noticed. And for the first time, I wondered if finding that wallet had really been an accident at all. The strange thing about discovering a hidden connection to someone like Vincent Romano was that I expected the truth to feel dramatic. I expected a moment where everything suddenly made sense. Instead, the truth arrived quietly, sitting between unanswered questions and memories I had almost forgotten. The entire subway ride home that night, I stared out the window at the passing city lights and tried to understand what had happened. My grandmother had never mentioned the Romano family. Not once. She had been the kind of person who remembered every detail about everyone she met. Yet somehow she had never spoken about the name that seemed to mean so much to Vincent. When I arrived at my apartment, I immediately opened the old photo albums she left behind. They were stored in a small wooden box under my bed, covered with years of dust and memories. My grandmother, Margaret Reed, had always believed photographs were more than pictures. She used to say they were proof that a moment in time had existed. I turned through pages filled with birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings. Then I found it. A photograph I had seen as a child but never truly noticed. An old house in the background. A young woman standing near the front porch. And beside her, a man whose face looked strangely familiar. My hands became still. It was not the same picture Vincent had shown me. But there was something similar. The same house. The same feeling. Like two pieces of a story that had been separated for years. The next morning, I called Vincent. I almost changed my mind 3 times before pressing the button. "Olivia." His voice answered quickly, almost like he had been expecting me. "I found something," I said. There was a pause. "Can I see it?" 2 hours later, I was sitting across from him again. This time, I brought the photograph. Vincent looked at it carefully. For a man who always appeared completely in control, I noticed the smallest change in his expression. His eyes softened. His usual confidence faded for just a second. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "My grandmother's things." He looked at the picture again. "Your grandmother knew this place." It was not a question. I nodded. "I think so. But I do not understand how." Vincent placed the photograph on the table. "This house belonged to my family many years ago." I waited for him to continue. Before my life became what it is today, there were people who helped my family survive difficult times. People who did not ask for anything in return. I listened carefully. Your grandmother was one of those people. The words felt impossible. My grandmother was a kind woman who spent her life gardening, baking cookies for neighbors, and volunteering at local schools. The idea that she had once been connected to someone as influential as Vincent Romano felt like learning that I had been living beside a secret doorway my entire life. Why did she never tell me? I whispered. Vincent looked down. Maybe because she wanted to protect you. That answer stayed with me. Protect me from what? I wanted to ask. But before I could, Vincent reached into his briefcase and removed another photograph. This one was older. Much older. It showed a group of people standing together outside the same house. My eyes moved across the picture until they stopped on a young woman standing near the edge. My breath caught. That is my grandmother, I said. Vincent nodded slowly. Yes. The room felt smaller. Not because I was afraid. Because suddenly my ordinary life seemed connected to something much larger than I ever imagined. Why are you showing me all of this? I asked. Vincent was silent for a moment. Then he answered honestly. Because I spent years looking for answers about my family's past. I never expected those answers to come from someone who found my wallet on a subway platform. Despite everything, I almost smiled. That is a very strange way for history to return. A faint smile appeared on his face. Sometimes the most important moments do not announce themselves. I looked at the photographs between us. A forgotten house. Two families. A connection hidden for decades. And suddenly, I understood something. Vincent was not interested in me because I had returned something valuable. He was searching for a missing piece of his own story. And somehow, I had become part of that story. When I left his office that afternoon, I carried a copy of the old photograph in my bag. I thought I was taking home a piece of the past. I did not realize the past had already found me, and it was about to change everything I believed about my family, my future, and the man who was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. The photograph stayed on my kitchen table for 3 days. I passed it every morning while making coffee, every evening while preparing dinner, and every night before going to sleep. It was only a piece of paper, but somehow it felt heavier than anything I had ever held. My grandmother had left behind thousands of memories, but this one felt different. It was a memory that had been waiting for me. I kept asking myself the same question. Why had she never told me about the Romano family? The more I thought about it, the more I realized my grandmother was not someone who forgot important things. She remembered birthdays from 30 years ago. She remembered the names of neighbors she had only met once. She remembered small acts of kindness that most people would have forgotten. So why had she hidden this? I needed answers. The following morning, I visited the old house where my grandmother had lived for nearly 40 years before she passed away. The neighborhood had changed, but the feeling remained the same. The old trees were still there. The small front porch still had the same wooden steps where I used to sit as a child. Walking through the house felt like walking through a collection of unfinished conversations. I searched through drawers, old boxes, and shelves filled with books she had read many times. Then, inside a small wooden cabinet in her bedroom, I found something I had never seen before. A sealed envelope with my name written on it. My hands froze. The handwriting was hers. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened it slowly. Inside was a letter. Dear Olivia, if you are reading this, then you have found the truth I spent many years protecting. I read those words again and again. My grandmother had known. She had known this day might come. The letter explained that. Years ago, before I was born, she had helped a family going through a difficult period. She never explained the details, only that they were people who needed someone they could trust. She wrote that the Romano family was not defined by rumors or appearances. They were people with complicated lives, carrying responsibilities most others would never understand. At the end of the letter, she wrote one sentence that stayed with me. Never judge someone by the world they control. Judge them by the kindness they show when nobody is watching. I folded the letter carefully and sat there in silence. Somehow, those words sounded exactly like something my grandmother would say. Later that afternoon, I met Vincent again. This time, I brought the letter with me. He read it quietly, and I watched his expression change as he reached the final lines. She always understood people, he said softly. More than most. I looked at him. You knew my grandmother well? Vincent looked toward the window. She was one of the few people who treated me like a person before anyone cared about my name. That sentence surprised me. Before anyone cared about your name? I asked. He nodded. Power changes how people see you. Some people only see what they can gain. Others only see what they fear. Your grandmother saw something different. I thought about that. It explained why he seemed different around her memory. Why a simple photograph had affected him more than any business conversation ever could. Why did you never find her? I asked. Vincent was quiet for a moment. I tried. But life moved quickly. Years passed. People changed. I thought that chapter was closed. He looked at me. Then you walked into my office holding the one thing I thought I would never see again. I smiled slightly. So finding your wallet was not just a coincidence. He looked at me carefully. I do not believe important things happen by accident. I wanted to disagree. I wanted to say that sometimes a wallet was just a wallet and a photograph was just a photograph. But standing there, listening to him talk about my grandmother, I could not dismiss the feeling that something had connected our lives long before we ever met. Before I left, Vincent handed me a small box. This belonged to your grandmother. She gave it to my family years ago, and somehow it came back to me. Inside was a simple necklace with a small silver charm. Nothing expensive, nothing that looked important. But when I held it, I felt the same strange familiarity I had felt when I first saw the photograph. Why are you giving this to me? I asked. Vincent answered quietly. Because I think she wanted you to have it. I looked at the charm in my hand and realized something. I had spent my entire life believing my story began with me. But maybe some stories begin long before we understand them. And maybe some people enter our lives not because we are searching for them, but because something unfinished from the past is finally ready to be completed. The small silver charm stayed in my hand long after I left Vincent's office. I could not explain why something so simple felt so meaningful. It was not expensive. It was not covered in diamonds or made from anything extraordinary. It was just a small piece of silver shaped by time and carried through years of memories. But when I held it, I felt connected to a story that had existed before I ever knew I was part of it. For the first time in my life, I started looking at my family history differently. I stopped seeing my grandmother as just the woman who baked cookies on Sunday mornings and reminded me to wear a jacket when the weather turned cold. I started seeing her as someone who had lived an entire life before I knew her. A life filled with choices, friendships, and moments I had never heard about. The following week, Vincent invited me to visit an old family property outside the city. He explained that there were documents and photographs stored there that might help us understand the connection between our families. I almost said no. Everything about this situation felt unusual. I was a librarian. He was someone whose world was completely different from mine. But every time I considered walking away, I remembered my grandmother's letter. Never judge someone by the world they control. Judge them by the kindness they show when nobody is watching. So I agreed. The property was about an hour outside Manhattan, surrounded by quiet roads and tall trees. It was peaceful in a way the city never was. When I arrived, Vincent was already there, standing near the entrance of the old house. He looked different again. Without the busy city around him, without the constant movement of his office, he seemed less like someone everyone knew and more like someone trying to remember who he used to be. "Thank you for coming," he said. I smiled. I am starting to think I should stop being surprised when my life takes unexpected turns. A small smile appeared on his face. That sounds like something your grandmother would have said. Inside the house, everything felt frozen in time. Old furniture covered with protective cloth, shelves filled with books, framed photographs on the walls. It was not a place that felt empty. It felt like a place waiting for someone to return. Vincent showed me a collection of old records and letters. Some were written by people I had never heard of. Others mentioned my grandmother's name. Each discovery added another piece to a story that had been hidden for decades. Then Vincent found something that made him stop. It was another photograph. This one showed my grandmother standing beside a younger version of Vincent's father. I looked at the picture carefully. "They knew each other well," I said. Vincent nodded. "They trusted each other." I looked at him. "Why does that matter so much to you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because trust was rare in my family. My father spent his life believing people always wanted something from him. Your grandmother was different. She helped without expecting anything." I understood then why Vincent valued that connection so deeply. The world he lived in was built around agreements, negotiations, and carefully chosen words. But my grandmother had given something much simpler. She had given genuine kindness. As we continued looking through the old belongings, I noticed something about Vincent. He was not searching for business information. He was not trying to gain an advantage. He was searching for memories, for pieces of a person he had lost. "You miss her," I said, quietly. Vincent looked at the photograph in his hand. "I miss the way she made people feel." That answer stayed with me, because I knew exactly what he meant. My grandmother had that gift. She made people feel seen. She made them feel like they mattered. Before we left, Vincent handed me a folder of copies from the old records. "You should have these," he said. "They belong to your family too." I accepted them carefully. "Thank you." He looked at me for a moment. "Olivia, there is something I want you to understand." "What?" "You did not become involved in this because you found my wallet." I waited. "You became involved because you reminded me of someone I thought I had lost forever." I did not know how to answer that. The words felt heavier than a simple compliment. They felt like a responsibility. On the drive home, I looked out at the passing landscape and thought about everything that had changed in just a few weeks. A lost wallet, an old photograph, a hidden family connection, a man I barely knew who somehow felt familiar. I still did not understand why our paths crossed when they did, but I was beginning to believe my grandmother had left behind more than memories. She had left behind a bridge, and somehow, Vincent Romano and I were standing on opposite sides of it, slowly finding our way toward the middle. The folder Vincent gave me stayed on my desk for an entire week. I opened it every night, but I never had the courage to read everything inside. It felt strange to hold pieces of a past that did not completely belong to me. There were letters, photographs, and handwritten notes that connected two families I never knew had crossed paths. Every page revealed something new about my grandmother, and every discovery made me wonder how much of her life I had never truly understood. I thought I knew her. I thought I knew the stories that mattered. But now I realized people are much bigger than the memories they leave behind. They are made of choices, sacrifices, and moments that often remain invisible. Vincent understood that better than anyone. A few days later, I met him at a quiet coffee shop near Central Park. It was not the kind of place I expected to see him. There were no business meetings, no formal conversations, no people waiting for his attention. Just 2 cups of coffee and the sound of the city moving around us. "You seem surprised," he said when I looked around. I smiled. "I guess I am still getting used to seeing you in normal places." He looked amused. "Normal places?" "Places where people are just people." For a moment, he looked away. Then he laughed softly. It was a small sound, but it surprised me because I had never heard it before. "Your grandmother used to say something similar." I held my coffee cup and looked at him. "She really changed your life, did she?" Vincent became quiet. "Yes." There was no hesitation in his answer. "She reminded me that being responsible does not mean forgetting how to care." That sentence stayed with me, because from everything I had seen, Vincent Romano carried a world of responsibility on his shoulders. But he also carried something else, something much quieter, the need to remember the person he wanted to be. Over the next few weeks, Vincent and I continued searching through old records and family documents. The more we discovered, the more questions appeared. But something else changed too. I started seeing Vincent differently. At first, I saw the man everyone talked about, the successful businessman, the person who entered a room and immediately changed the atmosphere. But slowly, I started noticing the details nobody else seemed to notice. The way he listened when someone spoke. The way he remembered small things people mentioned. The way he treated employees with respect when there was no reason to impress anyone. One afternoon, we visited a community center that had once been supported by my grandmother. I was surprised to see Vincent knew the staff members by name. "You come here often?" I asked. He nodded. "My father believed success was measured by what you built. My grandmother believed it was measured by what you gave back." I smiled. "Your grandmother?" He looked at me. "I mean yours." For the first time, I saw how much he valued the people who had shaped him. The world saw Vincent Romano as someone powerful, but I was beginning to see the person underneath. Someone who had spent years protecting an image while quietly searching for something real. That evening, as we walked outside, I noticed he was unusually quiet. "Are you okay?" I asked. He looked toward the city lights. I spent a long time believing I had to handle everything alone. I did not interrupt. Then you appeared with a wallet and a photograph, and suddenly I was remembering parts of myself I had forgotten. I looked at him. "Vincent, I did not do anything special." He shook his head slightly. "That is exactly what makes it special." His words caught me off guard, because he was right about one thing. I had never tried to change his life. I had never planned to become part of his story. I had simply chosen to return something that was not mine. But sometimes the smallest choices reveal the biggest truths about who we are. As I walked home that night, I thought about how strange life could be. A forgotten wallet had connected two families. An old photograph had uncovered a hidden chapter. And a man I once saw as completely different from me had become someone I wanted to understand. But I also knew something important. Vincent's world was complicated. And the closer I got to him, the more I realized that understanding someone was not the same as belonging to their world. The question was no longer why our paths had crossed. The question was whether two people from completely different lives could find a way to walk the same road. The hardest part about getting close to Vincent Romano was not understanding his world. It was remembering that I did not belong to it. For weeks, I had allowed myself to believe that our connection was simply about the past. The photographs, the letters, the bond between our families. But somewhere between quiet conversations and shared memories, something had changed. I started looking forward to the moments when I would see him. I started noticing the small things. The way he listened instead of interrupting. The way he asked questions and actually waited for answers. The way he seemed surprised whenever someone cared about what he thought instead of what he could provide. But I also knew there was a line between understanding someone and becoming part of their life. And Vincent's life was a world I had only seen from the outside. One evening, we sat in the old family house outside the city, reviewing more documents from the past. The rain tapped softly against the windows, creating the kind of silence that made every thought feel louder. "You are quiet today," Vincent said. I looked down at the papers in front of me. "I am thinking." "About what?" I hesitated before answering. "About how strange all of this is." He waited. "A few weeks ago, I was just working at a library. Then I found your wallet. And suddenly, I am discovering secrets about my grandmother and spending time with someone I never expected to meet." Vincent looked at me carefully. "Do you regret it?" That question surprised me. Not because of the words, but because of the way he asked them. There was no confidence behind it. No expectation that I would stay. Just a genuine desire to know. "No," I said honestly. "But I do wonder where I fit into all of this." Vincent looked toward the window. "Maybe you are not supposed to fit into it." I frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "Maybe you are supposed to remind people like me that there is more to life than the world we built." His answer stayed with me. Because I realized something. Vincent was not trying to pull me into his life. He was trying to understand how to step outside of the one he had always known. A few days later, I visited the library where I worked. Everything looked exactly the same. The same shelves, the same quiet corners, the same familiar faces. But I felt different. Not because I had changed completely, because I had started seeing the world differently. A simple act of kindness had connected me to a story much bigger than myself. That afternoon, Vincent stopped by. He stood near the entrance, looking slightly out of place among the books and children reading on the floor. I smiled when I saw him. "You do not look like someone who visits libraries often." He looked around. "I am learning." I laughed softly. "That is a dangerous answer." "Why?" "Because it means you are admitting there are things you do not know." He looked at me for a moment. "There are many things I do not know." His honesty surprised me. "Like what?" I asked. "How to slow down." He looked at the shelves around us. "How to appreciate ordinary moments. How to believe people can care without expecting something in return." I realized then that Vincent had spent years building a life where trust was difficult. A life where every decision had consequences and every relationship required caution. But my grandmother had shown him another way. And somehow, without trying, I was showing him a small part of that same world. Before he left, Vincent handed me a small notebook. "What is this?" I asked. "My father's notes. Some of them mention your grandmother." I looked at him. "Are you sure you want me to have this?" He nodded. "Yes." "Why?" He paused. "Because I trust you." Those 3 words meant more than I expected. Not because they came from someone powerful, but because they came from someone who had probably spent years protecting himself from trusting anyone at all. That night, I opened the notebook and read through the pages carefully. I found stories about my grandmother's kindness, her patience, and the way she believed every person had something good inside them. But near the end, I found something unexpected. A note written by Vincent's father. It was not about business. It was not about family history. It was about a promise. A promise that one day, the two families would meet again under better circumstances. I closed the notebook and stared at the words. Maybe that was what all of this had been leading toward. Not an accident. Not a coincidence. A connection that had waited years to return. But as I looked at the city lights outside my apartment window that night, I understood something else too. Finding Vincent had changed my life. But the next choice mattered even more. Because knowing someone's story was easy. Choosing to stand beside them was something completely different. The notebook stayed open on my desk for several nights, but I could never read the final pages without feeling like I was standing at the edge of something I did not fully understand. Every sentence connected the past to the present. Every memory revealed another reason why my grandmother and Vincent Romano had crossed paths years ago. But the more I learned about Vincent, the more I realized the biggest question was not about our families. It was about him. Who was Vincent Romano when nobody was watching? That question stayed with me because the person I saw was different from the person everyone else described. They saw someone powerful, someone impossible to reach. But I saw the man who quietly kept old photographs, who remembered small acts of kindness, and who still carried the words of people who believed in him before the world knew his name. A few days later, Vincent asked me to meet him at the same coffee shop where we had talked before. When I arrived, he was sitting near the window with 2 cups of coffee already waiting. I smiled. You remembered my order. He looked slightly surprised that I noticed. You mentioned it once. I sat down across from him. Most people forget things they do not think are important. Vincent looked at his coffee. I spent a long time forgetting things that were important. His words made me quiet. There was something different about him that day. Not sadness exactly. More like acceptance. Like he had finally stopped running from parts of his own story. I read the notebook. I said. He nodded. And I looked at him. Your father wanted you to remember that people are more than their circumstances. Vincent looked away for a moment. He was right. It was a simple answer, but I knew it meant something. You know, I said, when I first met you, I thought you were someone who had everything figured out. He gave a small smile. And now, I thought about it carefully. Now I think you are someone who spent a long time trying to convince yourself that you did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city moved around us. Cars passed outside. People walked by carrying their own stories. Ordinary moments happening all around us. Then Vincent said something I never expected to hear. I am grateful you found that wallet. I smiled. Because it brought back your family history? He shook his head. Because it reminded me that there are still people who do the right thing even when nobody is watching. I looked down at my coffee. I wanted to tell him that returning a wallet was not something special. It was just common sense. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes the things we consider ordinary can mean the most to someone else. Over the next few weeks, our lives slowly became connected in ways I never planned. I continued working at the library. Vincent continued managing his responsibilities. But there was a difference now. He started visiting places he had ignored for years. Community centers, small businesses, places where people knew his name not because of his reputation, but because of his actions. I watched him change in small ways. Not because someone demanded it. Not because he needed to prove anything. He changed because he finally remembered who he wanted to be. One evening, we stood outside the old family house where everything began. The sun was setting behind the trees, covering the porch in golden light. Vincent looked at the house quietly. I used to think this place represented everything I lost. I stood beside him. And now, he looked at me. Now I think it represents everything I found again. I smiled softly. Your family. He nodded. My memories. My purpose. And the people who reminded me that life is not only about what you build. It is about what you leave behind. I looked at the house, the photographs, and the story that had connected us across generations. I once believed finding that wallet was the beginning of Vincent's story. I was wrong. It was the beginning of mine too. Because sometimes destiny does not arrive with a warning. Sometimes it appears as a small decision. A moment when you choose kindness over convenience. A moment when you help someone without expecting anything in return. And sometimes, that one choice opens a door to a life you never imagined. Vincent Romano had built an empire. But in the end, the greatest thing he discovered was not power. It was humanity. And I learned that the most unexpected people can become the most meaningful chapters of our lives.